Welcome to Autism Weekly, the podcast that discusses autism news, current events, and inclusion. Each week, we welcome a guest to the program to share their unique perspective and expertise as it relates to the fascinating world of autism. I'm your host, Jeff Skibitsky. I'm the founder and president of ABS Kids. I've been in the field of autism and applied behavior analysis as a clinician and advocate for nearly 2 decades. This week, we welcome Program Director of the College Internship Program, CIP, Jenna Knauss, to the podcast to talk to us about the ways parents can help their teens ready for adulthood and the community resources that might be available to help. The College Internship Program has locations across the country. They've focused on helping young adults on the spectrum find success in college, employment, and independent living since 1984. I'm excited to learn more. This is such a needed service. Jenna, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, I'm excited because this is one of those gaps that exist. I think the biggest fear for a lot of families is that transition into complete independence or adulthood. And I'd love to hear from you is, what is that, and I'll call it a wow moment, but what is that time that connected you to say, this is important to me?
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. When I talk to families about this, sometimes I love pictures and I love stories. So I ask them to imagine kind of standing over the edge of a cliff and you see something really amazing on the other side, but you're just not sure how to get there, and you definitely don't want to fall over. And I think that's what we try to do here at CIP is really just help kind of bridge that gap and provide enough scaffolding such that a young adult, can get to that place. And for me, I think I have so many moments like that here at CIP, but not without the challenging moments either. Every day it seems like I learn about a new challenge that a young adult is going through, and then we're back to the drawing board trying to figure out how to help them through that. So for me, I started here as a therapist and as an educator. I taught social skills courses, and it was a huge learning curve because as one of our board members, Stephen Shore, says, if you meet one person with autism, that's it, you've met one person with autism. And I was kind of thrown in on the first day, and I learned, I had done some work in private practice with young adults on the spectrum, and certainly read about and knew my research and curriculum. But I started, I think, on day one teaching 3 or 4 social skills classes, and I just remember that the students were the first to correct me and the first to tell me what was working and what wasn't, and I'd go back and reconfigure the curriculum, and I learned a lot, and I learned it from the students. But the moment when things really clicked for me here, and I knew it was where I wanted to be and that this was what I was passionate about, was probably one of the first convocation ceremonies that we host convocation every year, which is just kind of like our end of year celebration and graduation ceremony. And we had to host one virtually at the start of the pandemic, which was a huge transition. But one of the benefits of hosting it over Zoom was that we could invite people who wouldn't otherwise be able to attend. And in this instance, we actually had a young man who was in our program and had to leave early because he turned out was diagnosed with cancer. But he was able to Zoom in from his hospital room, and he was when he was here, one of the most animated young adults that we had. He was heavily involved in creative arts. He was a student leader and part of the student council. So the fact that he could join us was such a huge moment. And we went through the convocation ceremony, and at the some of them started asking questions via chat about him and how he was doing. And one of the students commented on his hair. He had lost his hair by that point. And he stopped the ceremony. We had about 200 parents and professionals and students present, and it was all over Zoom. And he stopped the ceremony and he said, I just want to share that what that student asked me about really hurt my feelings. It was kind of hard for me to be asked about something so sensitive. And I had a panic moment, sort of like, what am I going to do and how am I going to manage this over Zoom? And to be honest, there was a part of me that was probably thinking, oh my goodness, that, the ceremony is just going to go south. And there was that piece of me, wondering about what other people were thinking. And I didn't have to do anything. It was just remarkable. My students jumped in and they began to talk to each other about why that was a sensitive topic and how it could have been managed. And they began to, one, provide some constructive criticism to the person who said it, and number two, jump in and support this fellow student of theirs and tell him all the amazing things that they loved about him. So I guess just in other words, there was just this moment where I was probably tearing up myself because I realized I don't have to do anything. Like, all I had to do was hand them the curriculum and try my best to be a solid teacher and presence in their life. And they absorbed it, and then they took it from there, and they managed the whole thing. And it was just incredible to see, one, that something had stuck and that they were using it live in their lives, that the community, that they felt like they were part of a community and it meant something to them, and they wanted to kind of get it back on track.
It's amazing. I would be so proud of any group to be able to moderate themselves and to be able to take the skills they've done and kind of show that honesty, that transparency, that resiliency that you're describing, of putting themselves out there and talking through and working through a problem. So you definitely did your job there. If empowering them was what you were trying to do, is create that community, but also giving them the skills. So maybe you can kind of fill me in a little bit, because when I'm hearing this, I'm hearing graduation ceremonies. I'm hearing people developing skills that they're going to translate into everyday life and independence. And I think to myself, we have a bunch of patients that are clients that have come through our system, and I see them getting jobs. I see them out in the community. I see them learning to drive. I see relationships. Is this the goal of CIP, is to empower people to do whatever it is that they're able to access?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Our goal is first and foremost to take a student and meet them where they're at. I think every family here, every student comes in with a story. Sometimes the stories are filled with difficult experiences. They've had to navigate IEP meetings in the school environment. Some of them have experienced bullying and other difficult circumstances in their life. So our program looks at a person as a whole person. It's a comprehensive program, and what we mean by that is that we're trying to help young adults develop the skills that they need in every area of their life. So we help them develop a wellness plan. We certainly emphasize independent living skills. So our students live with us in apartments on campus, and they have about 12 hours of support every week just in the apartment to help them learn to cook and clean and develop a routine and learn the executive function skills that they need in order to carry out that routine. But in addition to that, we help them think about who they are and what they're passionate about, and form a realistic picture of their strengths and their weaknesses, and launch into either a career or academic plan, or a combination of the two. And I could talk more about what those look like. But underlying all of that, of course, are all the social skills, the emotional development that they need in order to launch into the world as a whole, grounded, well-rounded individual.
Yeah, I mean, all of those opportunities sound amazing. And these opportunities to be able to live independently, but just with some guidance, that wasn't always available. I mean, what did it look like 10 years ago for a lot of these young adults who were diagnosed with autism and they were trying to enter the world. Did they have these resources?
No, or they were few and far between. And our founder, Dr. McMahon, that's part of the reason that he started this program. And I'm here in our flagship location in Western Massachusetts, and we've been around for over 35 years. So if you go back even that far, he recognized, and he himself he's a psychologist and is also diagnosed with autism, but he recognized that there weren't programs like this, and that in fact, at that time, again, rewinding over 35 years, individuals were institutionalized. So we've come from all the way from that to say, 10 years ago, where I think we were just beginning to develop awareness around this diagnosis and what it means, and all the way to where we are today, where you can turn on Netflix and there are I'd probably find 4 active shows that are depicting something about an individual with autism, which is fantastic. It helps create awareness. But the other wonderful thing that I think is happening today is that businesses and organizations are making space for individuals who are on the spectrum, and not just making space for them within their organization, but also recognizing that they bring a unique skill set and talents that I don't have, that you don't have, that, we're all unique, but some of our students here, when they really understand what they're capable of and passionate about and how that might translate into a job someday, we recognize that they bring something that nobody else does. And I think that's where we are now. And, but 10 years ago, we were just starting this conversation, I think.
Absolutely. And most of the schooling situations, most of the treatment options are about helping the child within their environment that they're in. And it has been focused on the pre-education, the elementary education, all the way through high school and social skill development. But there is that cliff. It hasn't been an easy transition. And you've talked to a lot of these teens and their families. What did they say? What's their experience like thinking about leaving the school system, thinking about not having those supports, or if they had accommodations or modifications to what was going on in their daily routine? Is there fear?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think it's the first thing that people say if they're here on a tour, I'm just talking to them. I don't know what comes next, or I have some idea in mind, but I don't know how to get there. And I think it's, and they've come from a pretty structured setting where, for the most part, if you talk to the young person, they will say that they've been part of meetings and kind of talked about, but not necessarily to. And so we try, even from day one during our tours here, to put students in the driver's seat, to really emphasize that we're trying to help them really take charge of their lives. But it's what does that actually look like? And we have we set that up here at CIP by first starting with a support system. That's our staff, and to kind of wrap around the student and help them begin to understand what they need moving forward. But even for individuals who don't have that, I think you can create it. And I think it's a matter of potentially breaking it down into different categories. So for example, what does a post-secondary learning setting look like for me, and what did my accommodations look like in high school, and how can I make sure I get those in college? And sometimes it's a matter of finding the right professional who can help translate for you and help you learn the language so that then you can advocate for yourself. Mm-hmm. And that could be a therapist, it could be a coach who specializes in this kind of work. It could be a tutor. Sometimes it starts with parents. Mm-hmm.
But imagine even a peer. I mean, from your first story,
sure.
Jenna, it sounds like peers are probably that first line of defense and information anyhow.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about this transition, and I mean, I guess it's putting it into perspective of you have somebody entering into a new world, self-determination. I appreciate the fact that your organization brings people into the dialogue about themselves. It seems like something that logically we all should do, but it's missing sometimes. Mm-hmm. So when you're doing that transition, somebody, and I'll use college education as our vehicle to talk through this, is what does that look like? I mean, are there specific people that you're bringing in to make sure that there's success? Is it about the routine of college? Is it about navigating those relationships? Even knowing, how do I invite people out for dinner after classes? I mean, does it hit on everything?
Yes. So we could take college. And one of the things that we do here is we offer a course called Introduction to Postsecondary Learning. And the idea behind that course is one, to help students better understand their learning and listening styles. And number two, to really understand what post-secondary learning looks like, because we just go immediately to college, right? It might be, I'm thinking about transferring to a university, but it could also be a trade school. It could be that you're launching directly into a career and you're going to take a certificate course, or you're going to do an apprenticeship. It could be something as what sounds as simple as taking a learning permit test. That's a form of studying for that, as a form of learning, and you can request accommodations for that test, and you have to figure out, how to share with someone your diagnosis, or that you have accommodations for that driving test. But we, first of all, want to help a person understand what post-secondary learning is and where they might fit in there. Second, it is, if let's say you're thinking about going to college, then we're looking at the accommodations you had in high school and really putting language to that, as in translating what does that actually look like in a college class. And the next question is, how do I communicate that to my professor? So we often will accompany students to meetings with their professors and help them practice the language they need to use to talk about their accommodations. Because I think, unfortunately, many young people assume that if you hand a set of accommodations over to a college professor, that's it. They're suddenly going to magically be put in place. But actually, for many professors, you have to share with them what these accommodations look like in real time, and kind of break it down for them. So we help them develop that language. Sometimes we join them in those sessions. But beyond that, and I think that's where it could stop short, how do you navigate a college life? And so one of the things we do is we bring students to the college gym and the cafeteria. We use a social skills curriculum and then practice it on college campus, so that it transfers from the classroom to the real world. So it's really approaching it from social emotional angle is so important. Sometimes it also means, talking to your therapist about how you're feeling in class, if social anxiety is an issue for you, or something happened with a classmate and that, kind of reminded you of something that happened earlier in high school, and how are you going to navigate through that? So we try not to miss any angle, I guess.
It sounds like you're hitting a ton of angles through that process. But when I'm listening to what you all are helping to be able to allow people to access, I mean, it's driving, it's class selections, it's peer relationships, it's navigating the world around them. It's helping people to really get to their passions and making it a viable path forward, so that they're not being hindered by anything, is that they can really explore what's important to them. Is there anything that you do, and maybe it's through the intake process, maybe it's through discussions, to help people to realize, how to make their passions real life work, or how to be able to make sure that everything they're hoping to be able to do is that they have a vehicle to get there?
Yeah, sure. One of the things that one of the concepts that our career coordinator is kind of first to introduce to people is something called the Iceberg theory. And I'm sure we this comes up and can be used in a lot of different ways. But in this case, he's really encouraging a student to think about what they're passionate about and how that might translate into something they're interested in. And so, for example, let's say a student loves animals. And they think they might want to work with animals someday. And this is a common theme. And they say, I think I want to be a vet tech. What you see at the top of the iceberg there, I think, is that you get to work with animals. And it sounds wonderful, right? But one of the things that we really dig into is, what does that actually look like on a day-to-day basis? And what are the technical skills and the transferable skills, or the soft skills, that you need in order to do that kind of work? So beneath the iceberg might be that you've got to get pretty dirty every day. You're maybe, handling animal fur and feces, or having to transport them from one room to another, so you have to lift them. And sometimes students, they realize in that moment that what's beneath the iceberg isn't exactly what they're interested in every day. But we can still take that love of animals and think outside the box and think about how they might be able to turn that into a career. So, for example, one student, he loves the animals and he loves to be around people and he loves to talk. And so perhaps if he loves, something that he's thinking about is potentially training emotional support animals and bringing them into assisted living facilities. So that's, kind of one way that we take what a student's passionate about. We try to think realistically and help them really self-reflect and develop self-awareness around what they love versus, what they're capable of. And we all have to do this. We all have sometimes those moments where we realize that we're challenged in different ways. I can think of, things that have happened to me in the past week or so where I realized, oh, maybe that's not what I'm cut out for, or where my strength lies. But we really try to dig into it with them and break things down into smaller steps and paint a clear picture of what they're looking at, and then really think outside the box, which we did with that student.
And I think I've heard you say twice now. Once was that, you got to meet people with where they're at. The second one being that you meet somebody who is autistic, is that you've met one person. You don't know the skill sets of everybody. And you'll have people in the career world who are doctors. You'll have lawyers. You'll have accountants, engineers. You'll have cooks. You'll have vet techs who identify autistic. And what's interesting is that your program, the way that it's designed, it sounds like it's something that could be inclusive for a variety of people. I just listened to some of the skills you're talking about. My daughters would benefit from it. Do you try and include a variety of neurodiversity into the programs to be able to create mentorship models, or to be able to share information so that maybe autistics are guiding those around them on, these are my skills?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's such a wonderful question. And I'll start by sharing that not every person in our program has an autism diagnosis. Some come in with a learning difference diagnosis, some with ADHD, others who, are struggling to launch but will say that they have a lot of anxiety and that may be contributing to what's going on. And so not every student in our program has an autism diagnosis. And we also have international students, which is really incredible. And they bring, of course, when we're working with them, we might be working with a diagnosis or a learning difference. We also might be working with cultural differences, and we have to adapt our social skills curriculum, for example, to take into account, how their culture approaches something. But beyond that, we also work with social mentors or peer mentors. We try to bring in college students and master's level students who are working either in the field of mental health or human services, who are actually pretty close in age to a lot of our students, and work with them more or side by side, I should say, sometimes in the apartments, having meals with them, taking them out to lunch, going to the library together. And in that case, that's more of a peer-to-peer mentorship opportunity, so that one, our students are exposed to all different kinds of people, and number two, so that the community around us is getting to know our students and working with them and can see how incredible they are.
Yeah, and the way that you're describing this, and I'm just watching it, I know this is a clinical program or a program for independent living, or the way that it's so comprehensive. But I also, I take a step back and I look is that this is something that maybe as a community, we should all be doing. We should all be trying to figure out these vehicles. We should be getting the resources out there as organizations like yours make it so that it's accessible. But maybe it's a mindset too, that we all need to start changing and asking the questions and figuring out these resources and helping one another. So what advice do you have for teens who maybe are right now, they're doing great in high school, but they have that fear of entering into adulthood? What should they be doing? Should they be reaching out? Should they be talking with others? What's your recommendation?
Yeah, I think you hit on a passion of mine, so I'm glad we get to talk about this. I wholeheartedly agree. I think I was sharing earlier that I wish that I had a program like this when I was in college. We have a course here called Relationships and Intimacy Development. And we cover everything from dating to, boundaries in relationships to healthy sexual practices. We have a course on online safety. And I think to myself, I could have used those kind of classes, and so could my sisters. And I work with a handful of young people in private practice who are neurotypical, and I think to myself, they could use a program like this. But the world is getting more and more difficult to navigate, and I think young people today have so many more complicated and confusing things that they're facing. And so, yes, I think colleges or any post-secondary learning setting would do well to bolster up their curriculum around social emotional development and just basic life skills. I mean, I don't know, I think I had a tiny bit of this in college, but how many of us learned about, our credit scores? And I remember having, seeing banks outside the student center when I was a college student, trying to get us to sign up for credit cards, but there was no curriculum around it. We didn't really know what we were signing up for. So I think my advice to young people is to build a support team. A big part of transition and building resilience is having a solid support team around you. And you don't have to have a program like CIP to do that. But a sort of support team is everyone from your mentors to trusted family members. It could include a therapist, a life coach. I'm not saying you have to go out and hire 5 professionals to see every week. It could be, calling up an aunt who is really good with finances. And that's a free service, hopefully. But actually explicitly saying, would you be part of my team, as corny as that might sound? But I'm going to need some help. And I'd like to talk to you about finances, or I'm interested in this career, but I don't actually know a lot about it. Could I come shadow you for a day? So just thinking creatively about who you might need on your support team and asking directly for them to be part of it, and considering them as one of the people that you could reach out to, whether it's navigating, the cafeteria on a college campus, or the registrar's office, or, figuring out how to ask for accommodations on a driving test. But I think that's the biggest advice, is that we think we're in it alone. And sometimes our culture, especially here in America, emphasizes that. But we need a community. And I think we've learned that in this pandemic, that community is everything. And we need community more than we probably think or would like to admit.
For sure. And I appreciate the fact that you said that, because you look at most successful people in the world in general, these are people that probably reached out to learn new skills, never were hesitant to ask questions, to gain more information, brought in people, built a network, which is that community, built a team around them. And I think that the more that we could teach that skill at an early age, and especially with those that we're trying to empower around us and our children, and in this context for us as children with autism, is how do we give them the skill to ask for help, know what they know and what they don't know, and continue to build a repertoire of skills so that they are so empowered in the world around them that they can't be knocked down. And I think that's super important to realize. Well, I appreciate, Jenna, your time today. And I will say is that when you said comprehensive, I don't think I took that into heart until I started hearing everything that you're looking at and everything that you're trying to do. But I think there isn't a piece that I would disagree with. I think it's a wonderful program. And I hope to have you back on again sometime, because those pieces that you were talking about specifically, it would be fun to dig deep into those.
Thank you. And thank you for having me, Jeff.
And before we take off, I know that you said that CIP is something that it's more than just in Massachusetts, which is where your flagship is. And there are similar programs out there, but where are the resources found?
Sure. Yes. So, well, Pete, you're right. We have 5 different locations. And the nice thing about that is that we all use the same curriculum, but the culture at each center is very different. For example, I'm here in a small town. I love it. There's a lot to do out here, a lot of outdoor activities and cultural events. But we have a site in Berkeley, which is, if you're interested in a huge city and being part of that energy, then that's a very different culture. But the best way to access our resources is through CIPworldwide.org. And you can read about us there. But there are also, we're in the age of Zoom and technology. So we have some virtual tours that you can access online on that website as well. And then can connect with an enrollment specialist who can tell you about, all the things you mentioned, all the details that we could have gone into today.
Well, I appreciate that. And I do recommend that everybody reach out and take a look at this information, because it's vital for that success and transition. And once again, Jenna, we do hope to have you back on again, and appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Autism Weekly. We hope you tune back in next week to learn more about autism in the real world. Autism Weekly is now found on all the major listening apps, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. Subscribe to be notified when we post a new podcast. Autism Weekly is produced by ABS Kids. ABS Kids is proud to provide diagnostic assessments and ABA therapy to children with developmental delays like Autism Spectrum Disorder. You can learn more about ABS Kids and the Autism Weekly podcast by visiting abskids.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you again next week.